Is there a case to be made for gender-neutral translations? Should we replace masculine pronouns in the Bible when we translate it into English with, something a little bit more generic? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about exactly that. So let's start by talking about what is the gender-neutral debate really all about. It really all started back in 1989 with the release of the New Revised Standard Version, which was really the first Bible translation into English that really tried to eliminate essentially the masculine pronouns and such uses that we see throughout both Old and New Testaments in the English text. And so this is really where it all starts for us. And I can show you a couple of examples of this. For instance, let's jump over to Logos Bible Software, and I'll talk about how this works in a couple of passages. So here we are in John chapter 12, verse 32. And this is probably one of the more inane and less important elements. You can see here on the left, I have the New American Standard Bible. And you can see it says, "If I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself." Now, all men here, as you can see, is then replicated over here in the New Revised Standard Version as all people. I will draw all people to myself. So we've changed the word from men to people. Now, I've also got here the TNIV. This is today's NIV, which was published in, I think, about 2005 or thereabouts. Has been updated, I think, since then a couple of times. But you can see here the TNIV also takes that same approach. This is another modern translation that does the same kind of thing. And if we look here at the Greek, if I am lifted up from the earth, all I will draw to myself. In other words, in the Greek here, you don't actually have all men, you actually just have all. I will draw everyone. Now, the distinction here is that all here is masculine. It's a masculine plural. So everyone, all sorts of peoples, if you like, I will draw all. And so translating it then using a gender-neutral pronoun like all people rather than all men is kind of neither here nor there in one sense, because the intention of the pronoun pantas is just everybody generally, right? So it's not necessarily trying to make a distinction on the basis of male and female, and I think I'm not against what the New American Standard Version has done here, and you can probably get my view of how all this works as we go through this, but nonetheless, it's worth noting that here, this is probably one of the least significant instances where we see something like this take place. Another example of this is in Romans chapter 5, verse 18. Now this one's a little different because here we have through one transgression there resulted condemnation to all men. And if we look over here, to all men is actually the word anthropos, men is actually here, all men. Again, you see that same accusative plural version of pantas, so everybody again, but here with clarity around this is men, right? And again, you can see here that in this case, for the New Revised Standard Version, they've just changed that to all. They've skipped the word anthropos entirely and just dropped it from usage, whereas the TNIV has changed it to all people, condemnation for all people. Now again, how significant is this? Probably not that bad, because all are, male and female are both sinners. So, if it's good enough to call men sinners, then it's obviously good enough to call women sinners, and I don't think this is a really significant text. And you can see here the same thing goes here, life to all men, life to all, life for all, but again in the Greek here, for all men. Now, I'm not saying that is good to make these kinds of changes here. I'm just trying to show you in this the kind of changes that are taking place, and that not all of these changes are super significant. Some of them are more significant than others, and it's just worth noting some of these changes as we go through. The key thing to bear in mind here is that language reflects the worldview of the people using that language on a day-to-day basis. Now, what we see here is that there is a distinction between the way we as English thinkers, modern English thinkers think, and the way the Greco-Roman world thought. For instance, with English and today's modern sort of the way we think, we tend to be very precise in the way we use words. So when we use the words all men, we literally mean all males, right? We tend to think that way. We don't often use men now as a generic term for both male and female. And this tendency toward precision is actually a source of major issues of interpretation in the Bible generally. And so by contrast, the Greco-Roman worldview, they don't think in those kind of very specific, very precise concepts. They're not thinking about individual elements, they're thinking in terms of categories. Let me show you an example of this. If we switch back to Logos, and I talk through here, this is 1 John chapter 2, and this is a really debated passage, right? I'm just going to give you a very simple understanding here. He himself is the propitiation for our sins, and not for ours only, but also for those of the whole world. Now, in English, we think of the whole world then as every single human being. But if you were to apply this verse that way, you're going to end up as a universalist, which is to say that Jesus' propitiation applies to every single human being. But that's not what the word means. If we look here, the whole of the cosmos. This word cosmos here has the idea of the world order, and it doesn't, in Greek thinking, think about every single human being like it does with English. Instead, it's thinking more like, this is every tribe and tongue and nation and people and so on, which is what we find even more explicitly spelled out in places like the book of Revelation and so on. So really, the idea of cosmo here is every type of people group in the world. That's really what he's getting at. Every tribe, it's a similar kind of idea to every tribe and tongue and nation and people. The issue here is that in English, we think in very precise, very detailed terms, atomistically, if you like, which is a result really of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment period. And I'm not saying that it's inherently wrong for us to think this way. What I'm saying is that it's different to the way they thought in Greco-Roman times. They thought in terms of broad groups, categories, generic categorization, and so on. And so we can't necessarily then take our modern thinking and read it into the ancient texts, nor can we take the ancient texts and just sort of bring them over as if there's no difference between them. There are some significant differences in the way we think, and the language reflects those differences. Now, when I talk about these generic changes, we can actually see some of the ways that this works in the Greek New Testament. Let's, for instance, take a look at John chapter 4. So here in John chapter 4, Jesus is speaking to the Samaritan woman, right? And he's drawing out this application from the circumstances where they find themselves together by this well. And Jesus is saying, I have water that's not from this well that will give you eternal life. And he says then, whoever drinks of the water I will give him. And notice here that the gender neutral translations change it to give them. You have a plural rather than a singular, and I will give to him. And here we have a dative masculine singular pronoun that's being used to refer to him. And that's what the New American Standard does. It translates that as him. Now, Jesus knows he's speaking to a woman, right? And he knows that the things he's saying applies equally to her. In fact, he's evangelizing her at this moment, and he's using masculine pronouns to do that, not because he's trying to insult her, but because he knows that those masculine pronouns are perfectly adequate for use for a woman when it's applied in this way, because he knows that there's not this level of specificity here with the pronouns in the Greek, and so therefore it applies perfectly well. And even if you argue that, well, Jesus isn't writing this and the author has changed the writings, which I disagree with, even so the author themselves in the first century also understood this to be perfectly adequate grammar for the time as well, which means to say that masculine pronouns for both male and females was entirely adequate from a Greco-Roman point of view back in the first century. So we can see then that this generic idea, the use of generic kind of terms, masculinity and masculine pronouns as a generic term, was perfectly adequate in the first century as well, even if it's not adequate today in our English thinking. Some of these changes, as you have seen, are not terribly significant, but it's not just about making some of these things less masculine and more generic. There's actually times where we see the content being significantly kind of modified, if you like, and translation decisions being made that kind of obscure things a little bit from the reader. Let's take a look at a couple more here. So here we are in John 14, verse 23. Jesus answered and said to him, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. So the one who loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our abode with him. And you can see what's taken place here in the New Revised Standard Version. Those who love me will keep my word. So we've changed if anyone into those who. Right? And then we've got them as we go through here, which is a plural pronoun rather than a singular pronoun. Anyone, again, same thing here, but with the TNIV, at least they've kept the indefinite pronoun at the beginning here, but the same thing with the plural pronoun for the rest of it. And what we see here is if anyone, tis, here is the indefinite personal pronoun. It can mean anyone, anything, something like that. If anyone loves me, he will keep my word. And the te rese here is neither male nor female. It's just a third person singular verb, right? And the Father, my Father, will love him. Our ton here is a masculine pronoun. So the author here has changed the singular in Greek into a plural in English. And so this sort of, I mean, if you didn't know that this was a singular and you read this and your whole understanding was informed by this plural, who is those who love me will keep my word? How do I go find these people? Because I want to sort of hang out with them, right? And my Father will love them. I want to be loved like they are loved. So I want to go find this group of people because that's who Jesus is referring to here. So this change from a singular to a pronoun actually significantly changes the way you can think about and understand what Jesus is getting at here in John chapter 14. Another example here in Revelation 3:20, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and I will dine with him and he with me. And you can see again in the Greek, we've got masculine pronouns again, very clearly stated here. But here we've changed it from just masculine third person pronouns essentially to second person pronouns. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come into you. Now the problem here with this is that who are we talking to here? Because the English pronoun you can be both singular or plural. And in the context, Jesus is speaking to the church. So again, if you as a church hear my voice and open the door, I will come into you and eat with you and you with me. Now, I don't think that's necessarily how you're going to take it, but it raises that question, right? In the context, it could be speaking to the church as a whole, where the Greek and the New American Standard make it really clear that no, we're talking about the person who hears, the individual who hears, and the masculine pronoun is perfectly adequate for that in its entirety. Now, sometimes when we do these kinds of things, it actually has significant impact on continuity. For instance, here, Proverbs chapter 5, my son, give attention to my wisdom, incline your ear to my understanding. And you see here in the gender neutral translation, my child, be attentive to my wisdom. Well, why should I be attentive to your wisdom? Well, he goes on, so that you may observe discretion and your lips may reserve knowledge. Well, why do I need knowledge? For the lips of an adulteress drip honey. And so what you have by changing this from masculine to child in the generic kind of pronoun is you end up saying, well, wait a minute, are we concerned that daughters are going to be getting sidetracked by loose women whose lips drip honey? No, not at all. So again, the TNIV again retains son here, recognizing that there's a continuity issue here with verse 3. And if you change it from son to child, then you're raising the question of even homosexuality. Are we saying here then that the child, the daughter, could be attracted to a prostitute or some woman who's kind of trying to sort of say nice words to your daughter? That's not at all what is in view here in the original. And so son is a better way of translating this, and even the TNIV recognizes this in this case. So here's another one in Psalm 34, and this is really significant as well. You can see here in the New American Standard, he keeps all his bones, not one of them is broken. But look at the New Revised Standard Version. He keeps all their bones, not one of them will be broken. And the TNIV actually follows this as well. And if we look at the Hebrew here, we can see we have etzem here, which is bone. We have a feminine plural pronoun on the end of that, so it's bones, plural. And then we have a third person singular suffix on the end of that, meaning it's all the bones of him. So it's all his bones. Now you might be saying, well, Daryl, what's the significance of this? Well, this becomes really significant when we get to the New Testament, because it says here, it quotes, not a bone of him shall be broken. The point here is that from changing it to the bones of him, his bones, to their bones, we actually take away the clarity of the messianic reference that's built in to Psalm 34 verse 20. And so we end up having to, the reader in the English can no longer see that connection without actually knowing later on that there's a later reference to it. So we end up breaking not only continuity within text at times, but also the prophetic significance of certain passages as well. So whatever you think of gender-neutral language, my hope is that by looking at some of these issues, you start to see some of the challenges that come with making these kinds of changes and even adapting a translation from an ancient culture to a modern culture. And these kinds of issues are not issues only for English readers. These are issues for whatever target culture you're translating the Bible, and you're always going to have these kinds of issues that are going to come up. Before I tell you my thoughts on these and my own summary, let me just give a quick plug for this book, Understanding Bible Translation by Bill Barrick. Bill Barrick's a friend of mine and a bit of a mentor, and I appreciate his work. He spent a long time in Bangladesh doing Bible translation. He's been involved in translations from the Greek and Hebrew in about 9 different translation projects now, into about 20-ish different languages that have been involved in those different projects entirely. So when it comes to Bible translation, this is a really worthwhile book and introduces you to some of the issues that we do encounter. And I'll leave a link to this down below, and if you want to support the channel, you can use that link to do so at no extra cost to you as well. We're reading this book actually over the next month or so in the Biblical Mastery Academy community membership in the Reading Academy there. So if you want to read this with us, jump down below and join in the community there as well. Now, when it comes then to gender neutral translations, what is my view on these things? Well, on the one hand, passages like John 12 verse 32, I don't think there's a great deal of significance in adding all people in place of just all. I think that's very clearly in mind, and so by adding that, you're not actually significantly making any changes. But when you do make changes that have significant implications for what the reader is understanding you're saying, I think you need to be very careful with that. My personal preference is not to use gender-neutral translations. I use the New American Standard Bible when I'm in English. That's the translation I use. I might consider switching to the Legacy Standard Bible at some point, but I have I have an English Bible. Actually, honestly, I don't really use my English Bible very much now. So I do tend to use the New American Standard anyway when I'm in English. Eventually, I will probably switch to the Legacy Standard Bible, which if you're interested in that, you can find my review of that just up here. But otherwise, I think generally staying away from gender-neutral translations is a good issue, not because I have issues with the idea of, embracing all people or anything like that, but just because it makes such significant changes to the understanding that we take away from some of those texts. And on top of that, I prefer to make things more difficult to understand in a way so that I have to explain those distinctions like I'm doing in this video so that you have a better understanding of the original text. Now, I'm not saying that that's for everybody, but that's just my personal preference in this. But I'm interested in hearing your views on this as well. What do you think of gender-neutral translations generally, like the TNIV or the New Revised Standard? What translation do you use? Leave a comment in the comment section below and let us know, and I look forward to reading your comments and interacting with some of them down there as well. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget, if you're interested in reading more about Bible translations, join the Biblical Mastery Academy community membership. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, keep taking small, consistent steps toward mastery. See you next time.